Hi, everyone. Good evening. Today, I'd like to take a little bit of time to talk about narrative therapy. Narrative therapy is very effective and it has its foundations in the art of storytelling. And as human beings, we love to tell stories, listen to stories. Um, but narrative therapy is utilized to help individuals share their own personal experiences through personal stories. And these stories, when they're shared by individuals, help give meaning to people's lives and ultimately to help shape people's identities. And narrative therapy uses the power of stories to help people discover what their purpose in life might be, and as mentioned, helps to shape and frame an individual's self identity. And how narrative therapy works, it was developed by two individuals, Michael White and David Epston, and they wanted to have a form of therapy that helped to center the consumer, center the person, for them to be the focal point of the therapeutic work, and for them, the consumer, the person, to really be the expert. So, narrative therapy is very much akin to some of you may be familiar with recovery model, and which the individual, the consumer, is their own expert. And I'll do a future video on the recovery model as well too. So narrative therapy clinician is driven again by the personal story of the individual, of the consumer. And so how it works, and I just want to go over some of the techniques that are utilized in narrative therapy. So uh, individuals, therapists that utilize narrative therapy feel that narrative therapy helps the individual in their telling of their story, um, as being a form of action toward change. And so, this process of sharing our story, personal stories, helps to focus and begin for us to have and make change in our life. And the ways in which the narrative therapy might occur is, one, it helps the person objectify their problems so they can talk about their life experience and what current situations or problems or issues that they're facing. It also helps to frame the person's issue or concern in terms of a larger sociocultural context. So, um, for example, they may be discussing an issue or concern or problem they have, and they can see that, ultimately, I'm not the only one that is experiencing this. There are others that have a similar experience that I do, and so in that framework, we can begin to help the individual frame a solution to their concerns or issues through this telling of this personal story. And then lastly, it helps teach the person how to make room for other stories. So if an individual might be often pessimistic, it may be helpful to have the individual talk about something that's happening currently in their life that's pleasant or that's rewarding for them, and so that they can build, framing on what we had talked about yesterday in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy, the thought stopping. It all actually begins to frame some of the positive thoughts that the individual might then utilize in their moving forward towards a solution with the problem that they or issue that they've identified. So the clinician, the therapist, and the person in narrative therapy help to identify and build upon an alternative or preferred storyline. And these storylines exist beyond just a problem story. They provide a contrast to the problem. They help the individual reflect what their own true nature is. And it allows for rewriting of the individual story so that they can frame and see their concerns and issues in a new way, in a way in which there is a possible solution, or in a way in which they're not the only ones that are experiencing what they're experiencing. And people then begin to move from what is known as a problem story to a more positive or solution focused story. I'll be doing a video on solution focused therapy as well too. The therapist's role, really, the clinician's role in narrative therapy is to see what might be absent but what is implied in the person's story. So, what is the individual discussing and sharing with us, and what might be aspects that are missing in their story that we can fill in, that we can help in terms of moving the person towards a solution? And the therapist also helps the person explore the impact of the problem. And this allows them to identify what is valuable to them in a broader context beyond just what the problem is. And then people often find a connection between what their actions are and their choices. And we had discussed yesterday in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy how our thoughts and thought stopping can be a powerful tool for changing behaviors and feelings, etc. And so the therapist's role in helping to guide in narrative therapy the what might be absent but is implicitly told in the story is very important. And the process can then help the person better understand how they experience life in general. And it can help them to gain agency or ways in which they can begin to address problems in the future. So, few things about narrative therapy. Uh, Narrative therapy aims to transform the effect of a problem or an issue. Its goal is to make a space between a person and their issue, and then again, the therapist, the clinician, can fill in what may be absent but what is implied in the storytelling. And it makes it possible to see how a concern or an issue or problem might be serving the person rather than harming them. So sometimes the individual might talk about a concern or an issue, and it can be very apparent that um, there are other things of resiliency and strength that really can help to push the individual towards a solution, a helping to mitigate the issue or the problem. So narrative therapy is helpful. Um, it is helpful, though, when the individual has some insight into what is occurring with them. So, this form of therapy also involves good relationship building and trust between the individual and the therapist, as most interventions and techniques do. But more so, I think, in this sense, because the person is sharing a personal narrative and story that is important for them. And so it's important for the therapist, the clinician, to remain non judgmental and help to focus the individual on helping the narrative, the content of the narrative, be clear for them and to eventually help frame the self identity that the individual has. So, I hope this overview was helpful in terms of narrative therapy and a few of the techniques. And if you are interested in learning a bit more in terms of these therapies, if you simply Google narrative therapy or the two founders, Michael White and David Epston, Epston, there's a wealth of information that you can get. So, once again, thank you for joining me. If you don't mind, go ahead and comment down below what kinds of interventions or techniques or other videos you'd be interested in so that I can focus my videos in those areas. Appreciate it. Hope you're staying well and healthy, and see you in the future.